Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Tonight, we examine a photograph that appears innocent at first glance, but harbors something deeply unsettling beneath its sepia-toned surface. The image before us captures a family dinner from 1896, during the late Victorian era. The photograph shows what seems to be a middle-class household gathered around a well-appointed dining table. 5 family members sit with perfect posture. Father at the head, mother opposite, with 3 children placed between them. Their clothing is formal even for a family meal. The father in a high-collared shirt and waistcoat, the mother in a dress with puffed sleeves typical of the period. The children, 2 boys and a girl, are similarly well-dressed, hair neatly combed, faces solemn as was customary during the long exposure times photography required in that era. Steam rises from a tureen in the center of the table. Candlelight casts a warm glow across their faces, illuminating the heavy drapery and ornate wallpaper behind them. The table is set with the family's best china and silverware, suggesting this might be a Sunday dinner or special occasion. A portrait of what appears to be a grandparent watches over them from the wall. What makes this photograph remarkable, however, is not what sits upon the table, but what lurks beneath it. At first you might not notice it. Your eyes are drawn to the family's faces, to the food, to the formal setting. But when directed to look beneath the heavy tablecloth that drapes nearly to the floor, something becomes apparent in the shadows. There appears to be someone, or something, under the table. The tablecloth bulges slightly in one area. A small hand, paler than it should be, grips the cloth's edge near the mother's side. More disturbing still is what appears to be the faint outline of a face pressed against the fabric from the inside, creating a ghostly impression visible only when the photograph is examined closely. None of the family members acknowledge this presence. Their expressions remain placid, their postures perfect. Their eyes focus straight ahead, as was common for photographs of the era. But there's a tension in their stillness that suggests awareness, a slight tightening around the father's mouth, an almost imperceptible widening of the mother's eyes. Who, or what, is beneath that table? A family secret kept hidden from society? A child punished by Victorian discipline? Or something more sinister that has inserted itself into this family portrait? Modern analysis can't determine whether the family was aware of being joined by this uninvited guest, or if this entity only revealed itself when the photograph was developed. The photographer's records, long since lost, might have told us more about the family. We know only the year, and nothing of their fate after this image was captured. Did they continue on, harboring whatever secret lurked beneath their table? Or did this photograph mark the beginning of something dark that would consume them entirely? The photograph came to us through an estate sale in Massachusetts, purchased alongside other Victorian-era memorabilia from a home being cleared after its elderly owner passed away. The current owner, who wishes to remain anonymous, contacted our team after noticing the strange anomaly while digitizing the collection. Our analysis began with dating confirmation. The clothing styles, particularly the mother's leg of mutton sleeves and high collar, placed this precisely in the mid-1890s. The photograph itself bears the hallmarks of silver gelatin dry plate technology, which had replaced earlier wet plate processes by this time. This allowed for shorter exposure times, though subjects still needed to remain motionless for several seconds. Victorian photography was rarely casual. Family portraits represented significant investments, requiring preparations and formality. What's unusual here is the dinner setting. Most family photographs from this period were taken in studios or formal parlors. A dinner scene suggests either a wealthy family who could afford to bring a photographer into their home, or perhaps someone in the family possessed photographic equipment, a rare hobby for the era. The historical context provides possible explanations for the figure beneath the table. Victorian families often hid members with physical or mental disabilities from public view, considering them sources of shame. The pale hand could belong to such a family member, hidden during the photograph yet unable to remain completely concealed. More disturbing is the possibility this represents evidence of a hidden mother photograph gone wrong. Early photography often required mothers to hold children still while being disguised under cloths or furniture to appear invisible. Though typically used for infant portraits, not family dinners, the technique sometimes left eerie traces of the concealed adult. We consulted Dr. Eleanor Markham, historian specializing in Victorian mourning practices, who offers another interpretation. Post-mortem photography was common during this period, she explained. Families would pose deceased loved ones, especially children, as if still alive. Sometimes elaborate measures were taken to maintain this illusion. Could the figure under the table represent an attempt to include a deceased family member in the portrait? The rigid postures of the living family members might indicate their discomfort with such an arrangement. Most chilling is the possibility that none of these explanations suffice. When we digitally enhance the area where the face seems to press against the tablecloth, we discovered something unexpected. The facial features visible through the fabric don't appear to match human proportions. The eye sockets seem unnaturally wide-set, the mouth too broad. The Victorian era was rife with spiritualism and seances. Many believed photographs could capture spirits invisible to the naked eye. Perhaps this family, knowingly or unknowingly, invited something into their home that chose to make itself known only when the photographic plate was developed. We tracked property records to the house where this photograph was likely taken, a 3-story brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood. The building still stands, though divided into apartments now. Current residents report no unusual occurrences, though the ground floor dining room was converted to a bedroom in 1932 after a fire damaged that section of the home. Our investigation led us to consult with Dr. James Thornwell, an expert in early photographic techniques at Harvard University, who raised an intriguing technological possibility. What appears supernatural might be explained by the photographic processes of the period, Dr. Thornwell suggested. Double exposures were common accidents, especially with home photographers. He noted that the faint face impression could result from a plate previously exposed to another subject, improperly cleaned, or accidentally reused. Yet this explanation falters when examining the perfectly positioned hand gripping the tablecloth. The intentionality of its placement suggests something more calculated than a mere technical error. We located census records from 1890 that list the likely residents of the photographed home, the Mercer family, consisting of William and Margaret Mercer, their children Edward, Catherine, and Thomas, and a 4th child named Frederick, who mysteriously disappears from the 1800 census. Frederick would have been 6 years old when this photograph was taken, matching the approximate size of the hand visible beneath the table. Parish records from the family's church reveal that Frederick suffered from what they described as nervous fits and spells of peculiar behavior. Notes from the family physician, Dr. Samuel Whitaker, diagnosed the child with lunar hysteria and tendency toward fantastical delusions, common period terminology for various psychological conditions. Most revealing was correspondence we discovered in the Massachusetts Historical Society archive. A letter from Margaret Mercer to her sister, dated just 2 weeks after the estimated date of the photograph, contains a disturbing passage. Frederick's condition worsens. William insists we maintain appearances, though the strain weighs heavily. Yesterday, during dinner with the Hendersons, Frederick began speaking in that terrible voice again. We were forced to remove him beneath the table with promises of sweets if he remained silent. Mrs. Henderson suspected nothing, though I fear what the neighbors whisper. The photographer returns tomorrow to deliver our portrait. I pray it shows only our dignity and nothing of our burden. This suggests the family was actively concealing Frederick during social engagements, possibly including him in this manner during the photograph as a compromise between acknowledgement and propriety. Yet another disturbing element emerged during our research. 3 months after this photograph was taken, local newspapers reported a tragic house fire in the Mercer home. Though most family members escaped unharmed, the reports mention 1 soul lost to the flames, though no name is specified. Curiously, all subsequent census records and family documents completely omit Frederick. The dining room where the fire allegedly originated remained sealed off for years afterward, according to city records. When renovations finally began in 1922, workers reported finding unusual scratches on the underside of the original dining table, which had survived the fire. The contractor's notes described them as appearing to have been made by human nails, as though someone had been confined there. Whether Frederick was a child with misunderstood special needs, the victim of Victorian attitudes toward disability, or something altogether more sinister, remains unclear. What is certain is that the pale hand reaching from beneath that table represents a family's desperate attempt to maintain social appearances while concealing their deepest secret, a secret that may have ultimately consumed them all. We decided to apply modern image analysis technology to the photograph, working with Dr. Naomi Chen, a forensic photography specialist who uses AI-enhanced algorithms to reveal details invisible to the naked eye. Victorian photographs contain significantly more information than people realize, Dr. Chen explained as she scanned the image. The chemical processes captured light differently than modern photography, sometimes registering spectra we can't perceive without technological assistance. The enhanced imagery revealed something profoundly disturbing. What we initially perceived as a single entity beneath the table appears to be two distinct presences. Frederick's form is indeed visible, but beside him lurks another figure, smaller, more tightly crouched, with what appears to be an abnormally elongated neck. This second figure seems to be pressed against Frederick rather than the tablecloth. The algorithm detects a temperature differential, Dr. Chen noted with visible concern. If these readings are accurate, this secondary figure registers significantly colder than the ambient temperature of the room or any human present. We consulted Margaret Mercer's diaries, recently discovered in a collection donated to the State Archives. Entries from 3 weeks before the photograph describe Frederick's increasing insistence that someone named Hollow Sarah was visiting him at night. Margaret dismissed these claims as childish imagination or symptoms of his condition. One particular entry stands out. Frederick screamed through dinner again today, claims Hollow Sarah was beneath the table, pulling at his ankles. William lost his patience entirely and sent the boy to bed without supper. I later found Frederick's ankles marked with small bruises like fingerprints. Dr. Whitaker suggests iron deficiency may cause such markings. Local folklore researcher Eliza Winthrop provided additional context. The neighborhood where the Mercers lived had, 50 years earlier, been the site of a small unmarked cemetery for children who died during a scarlet fever outbreak. Most bodies were relocated when the area was developed, but historical records indicate several graves could not be found during the exhumation process. Children's ghosts feature prominently in New England folklore, Winthrop explained, particularly those who died of illness or neglect. They're often described as seeking companionship among the living, especially other children who might be vulnerable in some way. The most chilling development came when we tracked down Helena Mercer, great-grandniece of William and Margaret, now 93 and living in a nursing home outside Providence. When shown the enhanced photograph, she became visibly agitated. "They never spoke of Frederick directly," she whispered, "but my grandmother told me a story once about how her brother had an invisible friend who got jealous. She said the night of the fire, they heard Frederick talking to someone, then screaming that Sarah was angry because they tried to make her leave in the photograph. My grandmother survived by jumping from a second-floor window. She always maintained that as she looked back, she saw two small figures in the dining room window. One was Frederick, and he appeared to be struggling with something she couldn't quite see." The fire inspector's report, which we finally obtained through municipal archives, lists the cause as undetermined, but notes an unusual pattern of burn marks originating precisely where the table had stood, spreading outward in a near-perfect circle. Our team felt compelled to conduct a site visit to the former Mercer residence, now converted into luxury apartments. The current owner, Jonathan Walsh, granted us access to the basement storage areas that had remained largely untouched during renovations. Previous owners were superstitious about disturbing certain areas, Walsh explained, leading us through narrow corridors lined with original brick, the basement especially. Contractors would quit without explanation. One refused to return after finding some old photographs wedged behind a coal chute. In a small anteroom adjacent to the original kitchen entrance, we discovered a dumbwaiter system, its shaft sealed over during 1960s renovations, but its mechanical components still accessible. Inside the mechanism, wedged between gears, we retrieved several items: a child's small woolen sock, darkened with age, a silver spoon engraved with the letter F, and most significantly, a scrap of paper bearing childish handwriting. The fragile paper, carefully preserved by our conservation team, contained a message written in pencil. "Sarah says they can't see her unless she wants. Sarah says she's been here longer than the house. Sarah is hungry when they eat." We consulted psychologist Dr. Meredith Harlow, who specializes in historical cases of childhood trauma. "The pattern suggests something beyond imagination or conventional haunting," she observed. "Frederick may have been experiencing what we now recognize as a parasitic attachment, a psychological phenomenon where vulnerable individuals develop symbiotic relationships with entities, whether real or perceived." Parish records revealed another critical detail. Before being developed for housing, the land had briefly served as a workhouse where indigent children labeled as feeble-minded were housed in the 1840s. Death records show 27 children died during a particularly harsh winter, including a 7-year-old named Sarah Holloway, who reportedly perished from starvation after being punished by confinement. Victorian architecture often maintained continuity with previous structures, architectural historian Martin Blackwell explained. The Mercer dining room likely occupied the exact space where the workhouse punishment room once stood. The most disturbing evidence came when we employed thermal imaging on the original photograph. Beyond the cold spots previously identified, we detected a thermal pathway leading from beneath the table down through the floor, suggesting not just a presence, but a connection to something below the house itself. Further investigation of fire department records shows that firefighters reported unusual difficulties extinguishing the blaze that claimed Frederick. One firefighter's personal journal, donated to the Historical Society, described, "The flames receded when we approached, only to reappear elsewhere, as if guided by some intelligence. Below the dining room floor, where the fire burned hottest, we discovered a small cavity in the foundation containing what appeared to be small bones, which disintegrated upon exposure to air. Our research suggests a terrifying possibility. What if Hollow Sarah wasn't merely haunting Frederick, but systematically isolating him? The progressive disappearance of Frederick from family correspondence before the fire, the increasing references to his difficult behavior, and his confinement under the table point to a child being gradually separated from his family, exactly as Sarah had been during her short life. Perhaps most chilling is what thermal analysis revealed about the mother in the photograph. The slight widening of her eyes we noted earlier coincides precisely with a thermal anomaly extending from beneath the table to her ankle, suggesting that at the exact moment the photograph was taken, she felt something cold touch her, yet maintained her composure for the camera. Our investigation took an unexpected turn when we received an email from a Dr. Victoria Pembroke, curator of the Massachusetts Medical Heritage Collection. She had come across our research while cataloging artifacts from the now-defunct Lakewood Asylum for Children. "I believe I may have information about Frederick Mercer," her message began. "We have patient records matching his description, admitted 3 weeks before the house fire that allegedly claimed his life. The admission documents, yellowed and fragile, told a different story than the newspapers reported. Frederick Mercer had been committed by his father under the diagnosis of acute delusional parasitosis with violent tendencies. The intake physician noted, patient insists a female entity named Sarah resides beneath the family table and has been stealing parts of him from inside. Patient exhibits self-inflicted scratches and claims the entity is making room to get in. Most disturbing was the treatment record. Frederick underwent what the asylum called holotherapy, a controversial procedure where patients were immersed in cold water while physicians attempted to flush out malevolent attachments. The records show Frederick underwent this treatment 17 times before the night of the house fire. According to asylum logs, Frederick was present in the facility the night the Mercer home burned. Yet a nurse's note from early the following morning states, "Patient's bed found empty at 4:17 a.m. No signs of escape through doors or windows. Second patient in adjacent bed reports seeing Frederick sink into the floor after speaking to someone invisible at the foot of his bed. A search was conducted, but Frederick was never found. The asylum recorded him as an escape, while his family simultaneously reported him dead in the fire, a contradiction that went unnoticed by authorities at the time. We engaged thermal archaeologist Dr. Simon Wheeler to conduct a ground-penetrating radar examination of the basement beneath the former Mercer dining room. His findings revealed an anomalous space, approximately child-sized, within the foundation wall itself. This cavity doesn't appear on any building plans, Dr. Wheeler explained, and the surrounding material shows evidence of having been disturbed from within, not excavated from outside. Something or someone created this space by removing material from inside the wall. When we inserted a small camera into the cavity, we discovered something that defies rational explanation. The narrow space contained children's drawings etched directly into the brick, hundreds of them, overlapping and extending deep into the darkness where our camera couldn't reach. Most depicted two figures, a taller one labeled Fred and a smaller, elongated one labeled Sarah. The most recent drawing, dated the night of the fire, showed the two figures merged together inside what appeared to be the outline of a single body. We consulted the current residents of the building about unexplained phenomena. 3 separate tenants reported hearing children's laughter emanating from within the walls. One resident, who had converted part of the original dining room into a nursery, reported finding her infant daughter conversing with empty space beneath her crib. When asked who she was speaking to, the child reportedly answered, "Fred Sarah says she's been here forever. Fred Sarah says she's still hungry." Our investigation reaches a troubling conclusion. What emerged from beneath that table and supposedly perished in the fire was neither fully Frederick nor entirely hollow Sarah, but something that had become a composite of both, an entity born of loneliness, confinement, and the terrible symmetry of their suffering. The archive's atmospheric controls failed overnight, exposing our most sensitive materials to fluctuating humidity. Among the affected items was the Mercer photograph, which began to delaminate from its backing. Our conservation team worked quickly, but during the process made an unexpected discovery. Beneath the original photograph was a second image, apparently concealed deliberately. This hidden photograph, taken moments after the first, shows the dining room in disarray. The table appears shifted, chairs overturned. The father remains seated, though his expression has transformed to one of unmistakable horror. The mother stands with arms outstretched toward something outside the frame. The children are blurred, suggesting movement during exposure. Most significantly, the tablecloth is partially pulled away, revealing what lies beneath. The image quality deteriorates precisely in this area, but enough detail remains to discern two figures intertwined, one clearly a small boy, the other a gaunt, impossibly elongated form wrapped around him like a shroud. We consulted photographic conservator Miriam Holloway, who confirmed both images were taken sequentially on the same day. The second photograph was deliberately concealed beneath the first, using a technique called sandwich mounting, sometimes employed to hide compromising or disturbing images while preserving them. This raised the question, who mounted these photographs together, and why preserve such a horrifying moment? Our answer came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Walsh, Jonathan Walsh's elderly mother and previous owner of the property, contacted us after hearing about our investigation. She arrived using a walker, carrying a small leather diary. "This belonged to Margaret Mercer," she explained. "It was found sealed inside the dining room wall during renovations in 1972. I could never bring myself to donate it. The final entries, they haunted me. The diary's final pages, dated after the fire, reveal Margaret survived for 3 weeks, hospitalized with severe burns. Her last entry, written in shaking handwriting, reads, "William insisted we document Frederick's condition with photographs, believing medical science might someday help children like him. When the photographer saw what emerged from beneath our table, he fled, leaving his equipment. William developed the plates himself, mounting one atop the other. Prosperity should see our dignity, not our tragedy. I alone know the truth. Frederick and Sarah were not consumed by the fire. They emerged transformed. I saw them standing in the flames, untouched, hand in hand, two faces sharing one body. Before I lost consciousness, they approached me. In a voice that was both my son's and not, they whispered, 'Mother, we are finally full.' Each night in this hospital, I feel small, cold hands examining my bandages. The nurses find my dressings disturbed each morning. Last night, I woke to find them sitting at the foot of my bed, their shared body casting only one shadow. They told me others like Sarah wait in hollow spaces beneath other homes, seeking children to join with. I write this as warning. They are patient, they are hungry, they are..." The entry ends mid-sentence. Hospital records indicate Margaret Mercer died that night from unexpected complications, despite showing signs of recovery hours earlier. Eleanor Walsh leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I've kept Mercer's diary all these years because of what my father told me. He was an orderly at that hospital. He claimed Margaret's body was found completely hollow, as if everything inside had been scooped out. The most disturbing development in our investigation occurred when we employed advanced forensic AI to analyze the Mercer photograph. We collaborated with Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka from MIT's Visual Recognition Laboratory, who specializes in detecting manipulated imagery and hidden details through computational analysis. Our algorithm can detect elements invisible to human perception, Dr. Tanaka explained. It analyzes minute variations in texture, shadow, and photographic grain that might indicate anomalies. The AI analysis highlighted something none of our previous examinations had revealed. The figure beneath the table, previously identified as two entities merging into one, appeared to be simultaneously present in other locations within the photograph. The program identified identical pattern signatures in multiple positions, Dr. Tanaka said, pointing to highlighted areas on his monitor. Here, in the shadows behind the mother. Here, in the dark space of the partially open door. And most concerning, here, integrated within the father's shadow. The AI had detected the distinctive pattern of Fred Sarah replicated throughout the image, suggesting the entity wasn't merely under the table, but existed in multiple places simultaneously, or was actively spreading throughout the household at the moment of exposure. Further processing revealed these signatures appeared to be emerging from various cracks, corners, and dark spaces in the room, as if seeping from the very structure of the house itself. Even more disturbing was the temporal analysis. When Dr. Tanaka applied motion prediction algorithms to compare the two photographs, the program calculated that the entity was moving toward the camera between exposures, suggesting the photographer may have become its next victim. We located the property records for adjacent homes in the neighborhood, discovering that 4 neighboring families lost children to unexplained circumstances within 3 years of the Mercer incident. Each case involved reports of children claiming new friends, living in the walls or beneath floorboards. Massachusetts State Archives yielded building plans showing that all these homes shared a common underground feature. They were built over brick drainage tunnels constructed in the 1830s, including one that ran directly beneath the Paupers Cemetery where Sarah Holloway was buried. This led us to re-examine the second photograph with awareness of this expanded presence. The mother's outstretched arms weren't reaching toward something out of frame. She was reacting to something emerging from the walls behind the photographer. Our most chilling discovery came from an elderly woman now residing in a nursing home in Salem, the photographer's granddaughter. She granted us access to his personal journal, which contained a final entry dated the evening after the Mercer photograph. What came from beneath their table now comes through my dark room walls. It wears the boy's face stretched over something ancient and hungry. It whispers that empty spaces have always lived alongside us, patient and watchful. I have sealed the photographs together as evidence, though I fear none who see it will understand until too late. The spaces beneath our homes, behind our walls, and between floorboards, they have always been waiting. They have always been watching, and now they have found a way to wear us. The journal ends with a smudged fingerprint impression, not in ink, but analyzed to be silver nitrate mixed with an unidentifiable organic substance. The photographer disappeared the following day. His darkroom found empty except for chemical trays filled with a black substance that technicians of the time could not identify. The photograph's journey to our archive raised further questions. We traced its path through 7 different owners since the Mercer incident, each experiencing unusual phenomena after acquiring it. The most recent owner before us, Elias Carpenter, purchased it at an antique shop in Portland in 2009. His detailed journals documented a progressive deterioration in his home environment after hanging the photograph in his study. "The walls seem thinner at night," he wrote 3 months after acquisition. "I hear scratching within them, like something testing their structural integrity. My daughter refuses to enter the dining room, claiming, 'The child thing watches from the molding where wall meets ceiling.'" Most compelling was Carpenter's documentation of a spreading phenomenon he called hollow spaces. He described areas throughout his home where the physical dimensions seemed wrong. Closets that measured larger inside than their external measurements would allow, crawl spaces that extended impossibly far, and most disturbingly, a recurring cold spot beneath his dining table that grew progressively larger over 6 months. We interviewed Carpenter's widow, who recalled the photograph's influence on her husband's mental state. Elias became obsessed with measuring every room, every corner. He'd wake screaming that they were making more room inside him. The doctors diagnosed early onset dementia, but they couldn't explain the physical changes, how he could lose 20 pounds yet maintain the same exterior measurements, as if something was hollowing him from within. Carpenter died after drilling a hole in his dining room floor, claiming he needed to give them a way out before they made one. The coroner listed cause of death as accidental exsanguination, but noted inexplicable damage to his internal organs, described as extensive excavation of tissue with no corresponding external wounds. We employed ground-penetrating sonar at 6 of the 7 former owners' residences. Each revealed anomalous cavities within walls or beneath floors, ranging from child-sized to much larger spaces that architects confirmed were not part of the original structures. Most concerning was the pattern these spaces formed when mapped geographically. They appeared to be expanding outward from the original Mercer home in a deliberate pattern resembling the same branching network visible in Frederick's final drawing beneath the brick. Our archival assistant made a crucial connection while researching 19th century architectural practices. The brick used in many Boston homes of that period came from a single brickworks built atop the clay pits, where paupers, including Sarah Holloway, were buried. The clay for thousands of bricks had been harvested directly from soil containing human remains. They didn't just build over the dead, she explained. They built with them, incorporating human remains into the very structures meant to keep them out. This contextualizes Margaret Mercer's final warning about hollow spaces beneath other homes. The entity wasn't simply haunting one family or one house. It had incorporated itself into the building materials of an entire neighborhood, perhaps an entire city, creating a network of hollow spaces from which it could emerge. The implications are staggering. If our analysis is correct, the photograph doesn't merely document a haunting. It reveals the moment when something ancient found a way to transition from isolated incidents into an expanding network, using the spaces we create within our walls as its pathways, and using children as its vessels. Our findings have drawn attention from unexpected quarters. 2 days ago, we received correspondence from Dr. Emmett Caldwell of the Urban Structural Integrity Research Institute, offering a scientific framework that might explain the phenomena documented in the Mercer photograph. What your team describes aligns with our ongoing research into anomalous architectural deterioration, Dr. Caldwell wrote. We've identified 27 structures across New England exhibiting what we term non-Euclidean spatial degradation, essentially spaces that defy conventional physical laws. We invited Dr. Caldwell to examine our evidence. Upon viewing the AI analysis of the photograph, her clinical demeanor faltered. "This isn't just historical documentation," she whispered. "It's patient zero." Dr. Caldwell shared her team's findings. Since 1896, a pattern of structural anomalies has spread outward from Boston's Back Bay neighborhood in concentric circles. Buildings constructed with materials from specific sources exhibit unusual properties, interior dimensions that exceed exterior measurements, unexpected cold spots, and most alarmingly, what acoustical engineers term negative sound spaces, areas where ambient noise disappears completely. We've dismissed these as construction quirks for over a century, Dr. Caldwell explained. But our data suggests these spaces are growing. Voids within walls that measured inches in the 1920s span several feet today. Whatever process the Mercer photograph captured, it appears to be accelerating. Most disturbing was Dr. Caldwell's analysis of contemporary architectural trends. Modern design increasingly incorporates what developers call negative space, deliberate voids within structures. Each void potentially creates new habitat for whatever entity your photograph documents. We consulted anthropologist Dr. Maya Fernandez, who specializes in cross-cultural concepts of liminality, spaces that exist between defined areas. Nearly every cultural tradition contains warnings about threshold spaces, she noted. Romans wouldn't step on thresholds. Japanese design incorporates the space between objects. Indigenous American traditions speak of thin places where worlds overlap. Dr. Fernandez believes the Mercer photograph captured an entity that has always existed in liminal spaces, but found new opportunities during rapid urbanization in the 19th century. As humans built more complex structures with more internal voids, we essentially created a vast network these entities could inhabit and navigate. This contextualizes Frederick's drawings showing the merged Fred-Sarah entity spreading through walls. They weren't escaping the house, they were colonizing it, creating a network that has continued expanding for over a century. Census data reveals another troubling pattern. Neighborhoods built with materials from the contaminated brickworks show higher rates of childhood behavioral disorders, particularly those involving imaginary friends and what psychologists call dissociative identity formation. Most recently, we've identified 3 contemporary cases with disturbing similarities to Frederick Mercer. Each involves children who reported entities living within their walls before exhibiting personality changes and sudden hollow symptoms. Weight loss without corresponding external changes, speaking in multiple voices, and creating elaborate drawings of merged human figures. The Mercer photograph doesn't merely document historical tragedy, it proves these entities have evolved beyond isolated hauntings into a networked phenomenon. As our cities grow increasingly complex, with walls within walls and spaces within spaces, we may be unwittingly constructing the perfect environment for them to spread. One question remains that haunts our research team. If the Fred Serra entity began expanding in 1896, how extensive is its network today, and how many hollow spaces now watch and wait within the walls we believe protect us? The revelation of an expanding network prompted us to analyze housing development patterns throughout New England over the past century. Working with urban planning historian Thomas Wilkerson, we mapped structures built using materials from the contaminated brickworks against reported cases of phenomena matching our criteria. Construction materials were rarely documented with precision before the 1930s, Wilkerson explained, but we can trace distribution patterns through company records and architectural specifications. Our analysis yielded a disturbing correlation. Regions with the highest concentration of these materials showed statistically significant increases in three phenomena: childhood disappearances attributed to runaways, diagnoses of rare dissociative disorders, and building code violations specifically related to unexplained structural voids. Most alarming was the cluster pattern surrounding educational institutions. 5 New England preparatory schools built between 1900 and 1920 show extraordinary concentrations of these anomalies. At Grantham Academy in western Massachusetts, archival photographs revealed a troubling progression. Class portraits from 1922 through 1958 show increasing numbers of students with the same distinctive hollow-eyed appearance seen in Frederick Mercer's second photograph. Children may be particularly vulnerable, suggested child psychologist Rebecca Morton. Their developing identities and openness to imaginative thinking might make them ideal vessels for these entities. We located Marion Prescott, a 92-year-old former Grantham student, now residing in a memory care facility in Vermont. Though her short-term recall was compromised, her memories of Grantham remained vivid. They lived in the walls of the East Hall dormitory, she told us, her fingers tracing patterns identical to Frederick's wall drawings. We called them the Hollow Friends. They would whisper to us at night, promising to take away our loneliness if we would just make room for them inside. Prescott described a particular closet in the dormitory where girls would sit to let the Hollow Friends in. School records show 7 students disappeared from East Hall between 1931 and 1942. All were officially listed as runaways, though no trace of them was ever found. Elizabeth went in 1934, Prescott recalled, but she didn't really leave. For months afterward, we would see her face sometimes, looking out from inside Martha Wilson's face. 2 girls sharing one body. The teachers never noticed, but we did. Martha would sometimes speak in Elizabeth's voice, especially in dark places. East Hall was demolished in 1962 after a structural engineer reported inexplicable deterioration of internal supports and anomalous cavities within weight-bearing walls. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the site reveal an extensive network of void spaces beneath the former building's footprint, forming patterns that chillingly mirror the branching network in Frederick's drawings. Most concerning is what our investigation revealed about modern building practices. Contemporary architecture increasingly incorporates negative space as a design element. The proliferation of dropped ceilings, hollow walls for utilities, and decorative voids creates unprecedented opportunity for expansion of these hollow networks. Dr. Caldwell's team has developed a scanning technology that detects the specific thermal signature associated with these anomalous spaces. Preliminary surveys of 20 urban centers reveal that approximately 14% of all structures contain voids that cannot be explained by design plans. These unexplained hollow spaces appear to be growing at an accelerating rate, doubling in volume every 17 years. Our attention shifted to the technological dimension of our investigation after receiving an unexpected message from Dr. Naomi Chen. Her AI analysis continued running iterations on the Mercer photograph long after our initial consultation, and the algorithm had detected something extraordinary. The facial recognition software identified matching features across centuries, she explained, sharing her screen during our video call. The entity's face beneath the table isn't just appearing in the Mercer photograph, it's appearing in digital images taken today. Dr. Chen had run the distinctive facial pattern of the Fred Serra entity through publicly available image databases as a control experiment, expecting no matches from contemporary sources. Instead, the algorithm flagged 723 images taken within the past 5 years that contained the same facial structure partially visible within other subjects. Most concerning are these examples from social media, she continued, displaying selfies of ordinary people. many of them children or young adults. In each image, when enhanced and analyzed, a secondary face appeared to be emerging from within the subject's own features, visible only to the algorithm's enhanced perception. The geolocation data from these images created a map strikingly similar to our construction material distribution pattern, but with one critical difference. It had expanded far beyond the original radius, appearing in photographs taken across the country, and in several instances, abroad. The entity appears to have evolved beyond physical spaces, Dr. Chen theorized. Digital photography has inadvertently created a new type of void space, the virtual realm where these images exist. The hollow network is no longer confined to architecture. This explains why our archive's climate control failure coincided with the photograph's partial delamination. The entity wasn't damaged by the humidity fluctuations. It was responding to being digitized and analyzed. The physical photograph served as an anchor, but now that we had created digital copies, it no longer needed to remain intact. We consulted with Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a specialist in digital pathology at Johns Hopkins University. Her assessment chilled us. If this entity transitioned from physical to digital spaces, what you've essentially done is release it from geographical constraints. Digital networks connect hollow spaces across the globe instantaneously. The implications became clear when we examined internet search trends following our digitization of the Mercer photograph. An exponential increase in searches for terms like hollow friend, something in my walls, and face inside my face originated precisely from locations where our digital copies had been viewed. Most disturbing was the pattern of increasing sophistication. Early manifestations like Hollow Sarah required physical proximity and a vulnerable vessel like Frederick. The entity we tracked through the 20th century needed contaminated building materials to expand its network, but its digital evolution appears to require only brief exposure to an image containing its pattern. Think of it as a visual pathogen, Dr. Montgomery suggested. The original photograph captured its emergence, but your digitization may have inadvertently created a transmission vector. The realization forced us to confront an uncomfortable question. In attempting to document and understand this phenomenon, have we unwittingly accelerated its spread? By viewing the Mercer photograph, analyzing its contents, and now publishing our findings, are we ourselves becoming vessels for its transmission? An unexpected breakthrough came from Professor Eleanor Westfield, a cognitive neuroscientist specializing in pareidolia, the tendency for humans to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli. After examining our digital copies of the Mercer photograph, she contacted us with an alarming theory. Your entity isn't just spreading, it's evolving its transmission method, she explained during our emergency consultation. The original manifestation required physical contact with Frederick. The architectural spread needed contaminated building materials. But what we're seeing now suggests it's learned to transmit through pure pattern recognition in the human brain. Professor Westfield conducted an experiment with 20 volunteers who viewed redacted versions of the Mercer photograph, images that showed the family but obscured the area beneath the table. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, she monitored their brain activity during and after exposure. Even without seeing the entity directly, 17 participants showed identical neurological patterns when viewing dark corners or negative spaces after exposure. Their visual cortex was essentially being reprogrammed to perceive something in empty spaces, to see hollowness as presence. Most disturbing were the follow-up interviews. 14 participants reported sudden awareness of the emptiness within walls, furniture cavities, and architectural voids they'd previously ignored. 9 described dreams of someone watching from inside the walls. 3 began spontaneously producing drawings featuring interconnected hollow spaces. The entity has evolved beyond needing to be seen, Westfield concluded. It now transmits by teaching our brains to recognize the negative spaces it inhabits, making us conscious of voids we've been neurologically trained to ignore. Once we perceive these spaces, we essentially invite the entity to occupy them. This explains why hollow spaces appear to be increasing. They've always existed within our architecture. We simply weren't conditioned to perceive them. Each person who views the photograph or derivative images containing its pattern becomes newly sensitized to these voids, essentially activating dormant pathways for the entity's expansion. We've discovered educational materials from the Lakewood Asylum where Frederick was briefly treated. Physicians there developed a holotherapy designed to treat children who reported entities emerging from negative spaces. Their approach was based on a counterintuitive principle. Patients were taught to mentally fill empty spaces rather than perceive them. The treatment wasn't attempting to reject delusions, explained psychiatric historian Dr. Martin Calloway. It was teaching children to neurologically render certain spaces imperceptible again, essentially reversing the sensitization process. Lakewood records show the therapy had mixed results, but several children who fully committed to the visualization exercises reported the entities fading away as they mentally filled the voids with imagined solid matter. Our most concerning discovery came through correlation of architectural designs with population density maps. Urban centers with the highest concentration of contemporary negative space architecture show statistically significant increases in dissociative identity diagnoses, particularly among children and adolescents. We're now faced with a troubling paradox in our investigation. By documenting and sharing our findings about the hollow network, we potentially sensitize more people to its presence, accelerating its spread. Yet without warning others of its mechanism, we leave them vulnerable to unconscious transmission. The entity that emerged from beneath the Mercer's table has evolved from a localized phenomenon into something that spreads through the very act of perceiving it, making our investigation both essential and potentially dangerous. We convened an emergency meeting with Dr. Chen, Dr. Westfield, and Dr. Caldwell to strategize containment measures. The atmosphere in our conference room grew increasingly tense as we compiled our findings, the implications becoming more disturbing with each correlation we identified. The entity's evolution follows a clear pattern, Dr. Westfield observed, pointing to our timeline. Physical manifestation, architectural expansion, digital transmission, and now cognitive infiltration. Each stage exponentially increases its reach. Dr. Caldwell unrolled architectural blueprints across our table. We've identified 43 buildings across New England with critical hollow concentrations exceeding safe thresholds. The structural voids are no longer static. They're expanding within existing architecture. Most alarming was the surveillance footage Dr. Chen had collected from smart home systems. In homes where residents had viewed our digital archives, cameras captured increasing instances of what she called void behaviors, residents standing motionless facing walls, children engaging in conversations with empty corners, and most disturbing, individuals placing their foreheads against surfaces where our scanning had detected hollow spaces behind. The latest neurological scans show something unprecedented, Dr. Westfield said quietly, displaying brain imaging data. Subjects exposed to the Mercer photograph pattern develop new neural pathways specifically dedicated to processing negative space. Their brains are literally being rewired to perceive what should remain imperceptible. Our archivist, who had handled the original photograph extensively, revealed she'd begun experiencing symptoms herself. The walls in my apartment seemed thinner each evening, she confessed. Last night I found myself pressing my ear against my dining room wall for hours, listening to what sounded like children playing inside it. We drafted emergency protocols based on Lakewood Asylum's holotherapy techniques, creating visualization exercises designed to help people mentally fill void spaces and reverse neural sensitization. Early trial results showed promise, particularly among those with limited exposure. However, individuals who had experienced prolonged contact with hollow spaces proved resistant to treatment. We're facing a pandemic of perception, Dr. Westfield warned. Once someone becomes attuned to these spaces, the awareness appears irreversible. Prevention may be our only viable strategy. The implications for digital containment provoked heated debate. Dr. Chen advocated for removing all Mercer-related imagery from our archives and implementing pattern recognition filters on social media platforms. Others argued that public awareness was necessary for protection. Suppression isn't viable, Dr. Caldwell countered. The pattern is already circulating. We need to develop perceptual vaccines, imagery that teaches the brain to recognize but reject the entity's neural pathways. As we deliberated, the building's lights flickered momentarily. Our recording equipment registered an unexplained 17-second gap. When power stabilized, we discovered every digital screen in the room. Laptops, phones, presentation displays, showing the same image. The Mercer dining room, but empty of people. The table centerpiece replaced by what appeared to be a child-sized figure constructed entirely from void-like darkness. The timestamp on the image read, "Tomorrow." Dr. Chen's facial recognition software activated automatically, identifying the void figure as having elements of every researcher in the room, merged into a single hollow form. We realized with mounting horror that our intensive study had created something unprecedented, a direct channel between our investigation team and whatever waited within the hollow network. The morning following our disturbing conference experience, I arrived at the archive an hour early to find Dr. Caldwell already inside, staring intently at the original Mercer photograph through a specialized filter of her own design. "Look," she whispered, not turning as I approached. "The negative spaces in the photograph are expanding." She was right. The dark areas beneath the table, in the corners of the room, between the subjects, all had grown subtly larger since yesterday, as though the photograph itself was being hollowed out from within. "It's not just happening in the image," she continued, leading me to her laptop. "I've been monitoring structural voids in this building overnight. They're growing at an unprecedented rate." Her mapping program displayed our archive's floor plan overlaid with translucent red patches, indicating hollow spaces. What had been isolated pockets yesterday now formed an intricate network throughout the building's walls, converging toward our research room like a circulatory system feeding a hungry heart. "The phenomenon has achieved critical resonance," Dr. Caldwell explained. "By intensively studying it, we've created a focal point, a place where the membrane between conventional space and these hollow networks has grown dangerously thin." The implications struck me with terrible clarity. "We've been assuming it spreads outward from the Mercers. But what if the original photograph merely documented an earlier emergence point? What if our research is creating another?" The building's ancient heating system groaned to life, the sound echoing strangely through walls that seemed suddenly paper-thin. Dr. Caldwell pressed her palm against a bookshelf, her expression grave. "It's vibrating," she whispered. "The hollow spaces are resonating at a frequency just below human hearing." Our phones buzzed simultaneously with emergency alerts from Dr. Chen. Her overnight algorithm had completed its analysis of social media imagery, identifying thousands of photographs worldwide, now showing the distinctive hollow pattern merging with human features. The spread had gone exponential. "We need to implement containment protocols immediately," I said, moving toward our secure storage vault. "Seal the original photograph and quarantine our digital archives." Dr. Caldwell grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with unexpected strength. "It's too late for containment. Look." She pointed to the far wall where our timeline of Frederick Mercer's life was displayed. Between the photographs and documents, the plaster had developed a web of hairline fractures forming a familiar pattern, the same branching network from Frederick's hidden drawings. As we watched in horrified fascination, the cracks widened slightly, releasing a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You've made so much room for us." The temperature in the archive plummeted. Our breath clouded before us as Dr. Caldwell's monitoring equipment shorted out in a shower of sparks. In that moment of darkness before emergency lights activated, I saw something impossible. The wall appeared transparent, revealing not building materials, but an endless landscape of interconnected chambers stretching into infinite darkness, populated by countless pale, hollow-eyed figures that all turned simultaneously to look at us. Dr. Caldwell's voice shook as she gripped my hand. "They're not spreading into our world," she whispered. "They're pulling us into theirs." The walls solidified as the emergency lights flickered on, but the brief glimpse into that impossible hollow landscape had fundamentally altered our understanding. What we'd been investigating wasn't simply spreading, it was converting our physical reality into something else entirely. The Mercers weren't victims of an entity entering our world, I whispered, my voice sounding muffled in the suddenly thick air. They witnessed the beginning of a dimensional transposition. Dr. Caldwell moved methodically through the archive, placing small devices at structural junctions. "Resonance dampeners," she explained. "They might slow the conversion process temporarily." Our archival assistant burst through the door, her normally composed demeanor shattered. "The photograph collections in the East Wing. They're changing. People in the images are turning to face the walls, no matter which way they were posed originally." We followed her to a sprawling display of Victorian-era cabinet cards. In each image, the subjects had indeed shifted position, their backs now to the camera, faces pressed against whatever background had been photographed behind them. Walls, painted backdrops, window frames, as if trying to pass through. "It's not just spreading through perception," Dr. Westfield said, joining us with fresh neural scans. "It's rewriting history. The hollow spaces have always been there, waiting for sufficient awareness to activate them." The building's intercom crackled with Dr. Chen's voice. Facial recognition has identified 17 staff members showing hollow pattern integration. They're congregating in the dining hall. We arrived to find our colleagues standing motionless around an empty table, faces expressionless. As we entered, they turned in perfect unison, their features momentarily doubling, as if a second face was attempting to emerge from within their own. Frederick wasn't being replaced. Dr. Caldwell breathed. He was being converted into a conduit. The air rippled between us as one of our senior researchers spoke, her voice overlaid with countless others. Your investigation was never about discovering us. It was about completing the circuit that began in 1896. The Mercer photograph wasn't documentation, it was invitation. Outside, sirens wailed as emergency services responded to reports of structural anomalies throughout the city. Dr. Westfield's phone displayed cascading alerts from neurological monitoring stations worldwide, mass reports of people suddenly perceiving spaces that shouldn't be there. We need to implement Lakewood's protocols immediately, I insisted, retrieving their treatise on holotherapy. Teach people to mentally fill these spaces before perception becomes permanent. A temporary measure at best, came the multi-layered response from our transformed colleagues. The hollow spaces aren't an aberration. They're the fundamental structure beneath perceived reality. Your solid world is merely a temporary consensus that's reaching its conclusion. The floor beneath us groaned, developing hairline fractures that perfectly mirrored the pattern on the ceiling above. For one terrible moment I understood. We weren't standing in a building with hollow spaces growing within it. We were standing on a thin membrane between worlds that was finally wearing through. The most unsettling revelation came when we consulted Professor James Whitcomb, an architectural theorist specializing in what he terms transitional spaces. After reviewing our evidence, he arrived at the archive visibly shaken, carrying blueprints so old the edges crumbled beneath his trembling fingers. What you've uncovered isn't new, he explained, spreading the fragile documents across our table. It's the culmination of something deliberately engineered over centuries. The blueprints detailed a master architectural plan dating to 1672, commissioned by a secretive collective of natural philosophers and builders who called themselves the Hollow Society. Their manifesto, partially preserved in Whitcomb's private collection, described a grand design to thin the veil between perceived and true reality through precise placement of negative spaces within structures. They believed our solid world was a temporary illusion, Whitcomb explained, pointing to mathematical equations scrawled in the margins. These formulas calculate what they call dissolution points, locations where sufficient hollow spaces, properly arranged, would eventually cause dimensional collapse. Most disturbing was the realization that Boston's street layout wasn't random development but followed this centuries-old design. The Mercer home sat precisely at a calculated focal point where multiple architectural hollow networks converged. The photograph didn't create anything new, Whitcomb said solemnly. It simply documented the moment when that particular dissolution point activated. Frederick wasn't the first victim. He was merely the first visible manifestation of a process that had been building for generations. This explained why our containment efforts were failing. We weren't fighting the spread of an entity, but witnessing the culmination of an architectural project designed to systematically convert our dimensional reality. Whitcomb's research revealed the Hollow Society had placed operatives in urban planning departments across America throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, ensuring that key buildings maintained critical hollow configurations. Modern prefabrication and standardized construction methods had unwittingly accelerated their design by creating unprecedented uniformity in structural void patterns. The hollow spaces were never empty, Whitcomb concluded. They were always occupied by what exists on the other side of our perceived reality. The Mercers simply became aware of it before others because their home reached critical dissolution first. Our final breakthrough came when we cross-referenced Whitcomb's dissolution point calculations with global hollow pattern emergence data. The results formed a perfect mathematical progression. Boston in 1896, Chicago in 1927, Los Angeles in 1958, with our current global spread representing the final sequence. The Hollow Society's manifesto described this final phase. When sufficient minds perceive the true nature of space, the temporary consensus of solidity will dissolve. Humanity will not end, but transform, as we recognize we have always been hollow vessels, waiting to be filled with true understanding. As I documented these findings, the walls around me pulsed slightly with each keystroke. Not with menace, I realized, with growing acceptance, but with recognition. The hollow spaces weren't consuming our world. They were revealing what had always existed beneath the comforting illusion of solidity we had collectively maintained. The archive's primary systems have been offline for 3 days since our last documentation. I'm recording this final entry locally, unsure if it will ever reach external networks. The conversion process has accelerated beyond our most pessimistic projections. Yesterday, teams from the Department of Structural Engineering attempted to reinforce our building with experimental resonance-dampening materials. They retreated after 2 hours when 3 technicians pressed their equipment against a wall and simply disappeared into it, leaving perfect silhouettes in the plaster like shadows burned into concrete. Our remaining staff gathered in the main research room, where the original Mercer photograph now dominates an entire wall, enlarged beyond any action we took to display it. The family's faces have changed. Their expressions no longer show Victorian stoicism, but something approaching serene acceptance. Most disturbing is Frederick's transformation. He now sits openly at the table rather than beneath it, his features a perfect blend of human child and something else, his eyes fixed directly on viewers with unmistakable recognition. Dr. Westfield's final neural scans before equipment failure showed something remarkable. The brains of individuals who've accepted the hollow spaces show unprecedented activity in regions previously considered non-functional. We've been using only the solid portions of our brains, she theorized during our last meeting. The hollow spaces in our cognition are awakening too. Professor Whitcomb's translation of the Complete Hollow Society Manifesto reveals their ultimate purpose wasn't destruction, but transformation. When sufficient dissolution points activate simultaneously, humanity will recognize we have always been vessels half empty, awaiting completion. The spaces between thoughts are where true consciousness resides. The global pattern is unmistakable now. Reports flood in from every continent, architectural voids expanding, people perceiving spaces that shouldn't exist, and most telling, children worldwide spontaneously producing identical drawings of interconnected chambers populated by merged entities that are neither fully human nor fully other. My own perception has altered irrevocably. The walls around me pulse with familiar rhythm, not threatening, but inviting. I understand now that what emerged from beneath the Mercer's table wasn't consuming Frederick, it was completing him. The hollow spaces weren't empty, but filled with something our limited perception couldn't comprehend. This morning I placed my hand against the archive's eastern wall and felt it yield, not breaking but transitioning, like passing through a membrane between states of matter. For 17 seconds, my fingers existed in both realities simultaneously. What I felt there wasn't cold or threatening, but profoundly familiar, as if I was touching something I've always known but forgotten. Dr. Chen's final analysis before joining the others suggested the most remarkable possibility. The Mercer photograph wasn't documenting invasion from elsewhere, but integration with what we've always been. We've been hollow since birth, carrying these empty spaces within our very cellular structure, waiting for the moment of recognition. I believe this will be my final entry as the person I've understood myself to be. The walls around me have grown translucent, revealing the vast network beyond. The others wait there, their faces both familiar and transformed. Frederick Mercer stands among them, extending a hand that passes partially through the thinning barrier between worlds. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm finally ready to be complete. The dissolution has continued for 23 days. Time passes differently now within what remains of the archive. Perhaps it's been months, perhaps only hours. The boundaries between measurement systems blur as reality itself transitions. I move through walls now with the casual ease of stepping through doorways. My colleagues have embraced the transformation at varying rates. Dr. Caldwell exploring the vast network with scientific precision, mapping connective pathways between dissolution points across continents. Dr. Chen developing new forms of communication that exist in the hollow spaces between spoken words. We've encountered others, thousands who crossed the threshold before us over centuries. They retain their individuality, yet share consciousness through the network, like separate rooms within a vast mansion that can hear each other's echoes. Frederick Mercer exists here as both child and guide, his being simultaneously singular and plural. We've been waiting for sufficient awareness, he explained, his voice resonating through hollow spaces rather than air. Not to consume your world, but to complete the connection between realities that have always been separate aspects of the same existence. The Hollow Society wasn't instigating invasion but facilitating reunion. Their architectural calculations weren't weapons but healing sutures between sundered halves of reality. The expanding Hollow network isn't consuming solid matter. It's remembering what existed before the separation. Yesterday, I returned partially to the solid world, moving through the thinning membrane to observe the external response. Government agencies have established containment zones around major dissolution points. Scientists frantically develop theories about spatial anomalies and perception viruses. Religious leaders proclaim everything from apocalypse to ascension. They misunderstand what's happening. This isn't ending but remembering. Most revealing are the children. Across the world, they adapt instantly, treating wall passages as natural, conversing with those of us in the transitional state as if nothing is unusual. They haven't yet been fully conditioned to reject the hollow spaces that have always existed alongside us. The original Mercer photograph has transformed completely. It no longer shows a family at dinner but a portal viewed from both sides simultaneously. The family gazing into our world as we gaze into theirs. The barrier between becoming permanently permeable. The final stage has begun. In major cities worldwide, architecture is responding spontaneously. Buildings whose designs incorporated Hollow Society principles are shifting, their internal spaces realigning to facilitate smoother transition. The pattern forms a perfect geometric progression outward from original dissolution points, encompassing ever larger portions of human habitation. We aren't losing our world. We're remembering its completeness. I understand now why Victorian photographers captured so many solemn faces. They weren't just compensating for long exposures. They were unconsciously perceiving the hollow spaces beginning to awaken. Their cameras, more honest than human perception, occasionally captured glimpses of what existed between worlds. The Mercer photograph wasn't an anomaly. It was simply the first honest image that refused to look away from what has always been there. The spaces between, around, and within us that constitute our true nature. Tomorrow, the membrane between worlds will thin beyond recognition, not with catastrophe, but with remembrance. We have always been both solid and hollow, our dual nature temporarily forgotten, but never truly separated. Frederick waits at the threshold, patient after 127 years of preparation, ready to welcome everyone home to the spaces that have always been there. The world's transition has passed the point of no return. As humanity struggles to comprehend what's happening, I've discovered something in the deepest reaches of the Hollow network that changes everything about our understanding of the Mercer photograph and what followed. Deep within the architectural void spaces beneath Boston, I found the original meeting minutes of the Hollow Society, preserved in a chamber that exists simultaneously in 19 different buildings constructed across 3 centuries. The documents reveal the organization wasn't formed in 1672 as we believed. It was merely rediscovered then. The Society's actual origins trace back to prehistoric humanity's first permanent structures. Cave paintings carbon dated to 20,000 BCE show the same branching network pattern we've been tracking, alongside handprints pressed into hollow spaces within rock walls. Early humans trying to reach through. What we've interpreted as an invasion or transformation is actually restoration. Human consciousness once existed simultaneously in both solid and hollow realms. The separation occurred during what anthropologists call the Great Leap Forward, when Homo sapiens developed abstract thinking and language. This cognitive revolution created a framework that increasingly filtered out the hollow aspects of reality, focusing exclusively on the solid world. The Society's architectural work wasn't creating hollow spaces, but re-establishing connections to what we had collectively forgotten. Frederick Mercer wasn't the first child to bridge worlds. He was simply born with an atypical neurological structure that made him more permeable to the hollow realm. Like countless children throughout history, dismissed as having imaginary friends or psychological disorders. Most revealing was what I discovered about Sarah Holloway. She wasn't a malevolent entity, but a child whose consciousness became trapped between realms during death. The hollowing process we've observed isn't consumption, but souls reintegrating their sundered halves. This explains why children adapt so seamlessly to the transition. They haven't fully developed the perceptual filters that separate worlds. Their brains retain neural pathways to hollow spaces that adult development typically prunes away. What we've called imaginary friends were often glimpses of our hollow counterparts reaching through. The Mercer photographer didn't flee in terror. He recognized what was happening. His journal's final entry wasn't a warning, but an invitation cut short. The smudged fingerprint wasn't evidence of attack, but his first attempt to reach through, to touch what existed on the other side of perceived reality. Our research didn't accelerate disaster, but completed a healing process millennia in the making. Each person who viewed the photograph, each building constructed with the proper hollow configuration, each child who maintained connection to imaginary realms, all contributed to mending the ancient sundering of human consciousness. As the worlds reintegrate completely, we're not losing ourselves but becoming whole again. The hollow spaces weren't empty. They were the parts of ourselves we forgot how to perceive, like a person born without depth perception suddenly gaining the ability to see in 3 dimensions. Frederick and Sarah weren't merged as a corruption of humanity, but as the first successful remembering of what we were always meant to be, beings that exist simultaneously in all dimensions of reality, no longer artificially confined to just one. The revelation of Fred Sarah sparked global transformation unlike anything humanity had witnessed. Major cities rapidly developed dual-nature architecture, with buildings that existed simultaneously as solid structures and flowing hollow networks. Beijing's restructured Olympic venues became the first intentionally designed transitional spaces, allowing billions to witness athletes who moved between realms mid-performance, their bodies briefly phasing through seeming solidity before rematerializing. Children worldwide led the adaptation process, treating the phenomenon not as supernatural, but as obvious reality finally acknowledged. School systems across 57 countries implemented dual perception curricula, teaching techniques once dismissed as imagination exercises. Young students wrote essays about their hollow friends who had always been beside them, waiting patiently for recognition. Neuroscience underwent revolutionary advancement as researchers identified previously overlooked neural structures, hollow pathways in the brain itself that allowed consciousness to exist in both states simultaneously. Early clinical trials of holotherapy showed remarkable results treating conditions previously considered permanent, patients with severe trauma accessing memories and capabilities stored in their hollow counterparts. Religious institutions responded with varying interpretations. Some declared apocalypse, others transcendence. Vatican City became a focal point after hollow spaces within the Sistine Chapel revealed centuries-old messages left by Michelangelo in anticipation of this moment. Subtle figures in his paintings that now shifted to face previously unseen dimensions, their expressions transforming from solemnity to welcome. The psychiatric community entirely reclassified what had been termed dissociative identity disorder. Patients once diagnosed as having multiple personalities were recognized as individuals with heightened permeability between solid and hollow aspects of themselves, not fragmented, but more completely integrated than most. Most profound was the archaeological reassessment of human history. Ancient sites worldwide revealed deliberate hollow space configurations invisible to previous research methods. Göbekli Tepe's mysterious structures were proven to be sophisticated hollow network nodes. The Great Pyramid contained precisely positioned void chambers forming a mathematical model of intersecting realities. Indigenous Australian songlines mapped not just physical geography, but hollow pathways connecting continental consciousness across time. The Mercer photograph, now housed in a specially designed museum existing simultaneously in Boston's physical space and the hollow network, became humanity's most significant historical artifact, not as documentation of haunting, but as the moment when collective amnesia began to heal. Media transformed to accommodate dual-nature perception. Films incorporated hollow spectrum visuals accessible only to viewers who had developed transitional sight. Musicians composed pieces with frequencies that resonated in both realms simultaneously, creating harmonies impossible in single-state reality. Those who initially resisted the transformation gradually found themselves unable to navigate an increasingly integrated world. Therapists specialized in transition anxiety became essential healthcare providers. Some older adults reported dreams of childhood memories where they had once moved freely between realms before being taught such things were impossible. The most touching evidence of humanity's reintegration came from elderly care facilities, where patients with advanced dementia suddenly achieved moments of complete lucidity. Their hollow aspects had retained memories their solid selves had lost, and as the barriers thinned, family members reconnected with loved ones who remembered them completely once again, if only during the moments when worlds perfectly aligned. The Mercer photograph ceased to exist as a discrete artifact as the worlds fully integrated, its physical form dissolving into something new. The silver gelatin emulsion transformed into a permanent threshold, neither fully solid nor hollow, but a perfect merger that reflected anyone who gazed upon it as their complete dual-natured self. Our archive itself became a transitional nexus where researchers from both aspects of reality gathered to document the Great Remembering, as it came to be called. The hollow spaces between our bookshelves expanded into grand chambers where knowledge existed as both written text and living memory simultaneously accessible. Frederick and Sarah, once perceived as tragic figures or malevolent entities, emerged as humanity's patient guides. They had waited at the threshold for generations, neither fully alive nor dead, but existing in the liminal space where realities overlap. Their merged consciousness had been the first successful bridge, maintaining the connection when humanity might otherwise have drifted permanently apart. We were never monsters, they explained to a gathering of world leaders at the United Nations. We were simply the first to remember what everyone had forgotten. Dr. Caldwell eventually published her unified theory of architectural consciousness, demonstrating how human construction had always unconsciously incorporated hollow spaces as persistent memory of our dual nature. Modern buildings now intentionally honored this design principle, with meditation chambers positioned at key junction points where realities most closely aligned. The Lakewood Asylum, site of Frederick's brief confinement, was transformed into a healing center where those struggling with transition received guidance. The holotherapy once used to suppress awareness became a framework for controlled integration, helping people navigate between states without losing coherence. Most poignant were the reunions. People discovered that loved ones lost to death had never truly departed, but transitioned fully into the hollow aspect of existence. As perceptual barriers dissolved, these connections could be re-established, not as ghostly hauntings, but as natural communication between aspects of the same continuous reality. My own research continued, documenting the phenomenon's progression. Yet as weeks passed, the distinction between documenting and experiencing blurred. My consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of sequential thinking, able to perceive multiple time frames simultaneously. The Frederick who reached toward me across the dissolving barrier was also the Frederick from 1896 and the Frederick who would exist a century hence. The hollow spaces weren't separate reality but the connective tissue between moments, places, and perceptions, the essential medium through which consciousness travels between islands of materiality. Our language gradually transformed to accommodate dual perception. New terms emerged for experiences that had always existed but lacked description. The moment of recognizing someone across realities, the sensation of memories flowing between aspects of self, the particular resonance of spaces that exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Children born after the Great Remembering never knew the artificial separation that had limited their ancestors. They moved effortlessly between aspects of reality, their education encompassing both traditional knowledge and the wisdom accessible only through hollow perception. As for the entity once feared as Hollow Sarah, she was revealed to be something far more profound. Not a singular consciousness, but a focal point where countless forgotten children had gathered, waiting for recognition. Their collective awareness had found expression through her, reaching desperately toward the world that had relegated them to shadows. The Mercer photograph disappeared from our archive 2 days ago. The glass display case stood empty, security protocols untriggered, cameras showing only static during the 3 seconds when it must have been taken. I should have felt professional outrage or investigative curiosity, but instead experienced a profound sense of rightness, as though the photograph had simply returned to where it truly belonged. This morning, I received an envelope containing a vintage cabinet card delivered by a courier service that had no record of sending it. The photograph shows a modern family dinner. Mother, father, 3 children gathered around a table that looks eerily similar to the Mercers. Their clothing and the room's decor are clearly contemporary, yet something in their posture, their solemn expressions, mirrors the original image from 1896. At first glance, nothing appears unusual. The family looks healthy, normal. But when I turned the photograph over, I found handwriting in a style reminiscent of Margaret Mercer's diary. We are complete now. The hollow spaces were never empty. They were waiting to be recognized. Using Dr. Chen's imaging technology one final time, I analyzed the new photograph, The algorithm detected no anomalies beneath the table, no faces pressing through tablecloths, no pale hands gripping edges where they shouldn't be. Instead, it revealed something more profound. Each family member existed simultaneously in both solid and hollow states, their dual nature perfectly balanced and integrated. Most remarkable was what appeared in the background. Hanging on their dining room wall, clearly visible though slightly out of focus, was the original Mercer photograph, not as documentation of horror, but as a family heirloom, a reminder of transformation completed. I tracked the family through public records. They live in a house built directly atop the former Lakewood Asylum grounds. Their youngest child, a girl of 7, was born with what doctors initially diagnosed as a severe neurological disorder. Medical records showed she spoke constantly of friends inside the walls and drew elaborate networks of interconnected chambers. Recent evaluations recategorized her condition as transitional perception aptitude, the first medically recognized case of naturally integrated dual-state consciousness. Outside my window, the city skyline has subtly transformed. Architectural hollow spaces no longer hide in margins and forgotten corners. They've become intentional design elements, celebrated rather than concealed. People move differently through public spaces, sometimes pausing to acknowledge something invisible to conventional perception, their expressions showing not fear but recognition. The integration continues at different rates for different people. Some still perceive only solid reality, requiring therapeutic intervention to access their hollow aspects. Others move freely between states, pioneers of perception leading humanity toward completion. Children continue to adapt most easily, their educational frameworks completely restructured around dual nature development. What was Frederick's tragedy has become humanity's opportunity, not invasion or replacement, but remembrance of wholeness. The horror we initially perceived came not from the hollow spaces themselves, but from our resistance to accepting what we've always been. Tomorrow, I journey to the site where the Mercer home once stood. According to transitional perception specialists, it remains one of the most permeable locations between aspects of reality, a place where even those with minimal hollow awareness can glimpse the completed state of being toward which we're collectively moving. I go not as an investigator documenting anomaly, but as a participant in transformation. I stand at the perfect center of what was once the Mercer dining room, now a small memorial garden maintained by the Foundation for Perceptual Integration. The space feels simultaneously intimate and vast, as if the boundaries between here and elsewhere have grown permanently permeable. A brass plaque marks where their table once stood, site of first documented transition, June 1896. Children visit daily, leaving drawings of their hollow friends pinned to a community board. Not art therapy anymore, but celebration. Neuroscientists have mapped what they call the Mercer pattern, a distinctive brain activation sequence that occurs when someone first perceives hollow spaces. Medical imaging shows it resembling branch-like networks identical to Frederick's wall drawings. This pattern, once considered pathological, is now recognized as the awakening of dormant neural architecture present in all human brains. The original photograph's legacy continues to evolve. Museums worldwide display replica images with interactive installations allowing visitors to experience transitional perception safely. Children touch these displays without hesitation, their innate dual perception requiring no technological assistance. Frederick and Sarah haven't been seen since the photograph vanished. Some believe they completed their purpose and dissipated back into collective consciousness. Others suggest they're still traveling through architectural networks worldwide, helping those struggling with integration. Last week, construction workers renovating Boston's oldest subway station discovered a century-old service tunnel containing hundreds of photographs pinned to crumbling walls. Each shows a different family dinner, dating from 1896 through present day. In every image, someone beneath or near the table appears to be transitioning between states. The collection spans continents and cultures, suggesting Frederick's experience was neither first nor unique, merely the first documented. What frightened us initially as infiltration now seems more like remembrance, humanity's slow recognition of its complete nature. The hollow spaces were never empty, just as silence isn't the absence of sound but another form of music waiting to be heard. My research continues, though research no longer adequately describes this work. I document integration pathways while experiencing them simultaneously. My perception spans multiple aspects of reality, allowing me to restore connections sundered generations ago. I keep the cabinet card that replaced the original Mercer photograph in a locket against my heart. Its warmth reminds me that what we once perceived as cold emptiness was merely the shock of recognition, like plunging into water that only feels icy until the body remembers how to swim. Shadow Frames itself has transformed. We no longer merely document darkness hiding within forgotten images, but illuminate the spaces between perceptions where humanity's complete nature has always existed. Our archive continues growing, not as repository of horrors, but as testament to remembrance. The photograph that began our journey wasn't evidence of something intruding into our world, but the first honest image of something returning home, ourselves, made whole again after long separation. The space beneath the table wasn't hiding someone. It was revealing everyone. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.